Have you ever made a decision you were completely sure about, only to look back months later and wonder what went wrong with your thinking? Here is something unsettling to consider. In that moment, you probably were not thinking at all. Your brain was running on automatic, taking shortcuts, filtering information to match what you already believed, protecting your ego from uncomfortable truths. And the entire time, it felt exactly like careful, rational analysis. This is the central insight of Reprogram Your Mind by Maha Elwaykel. The book argues that the biggest obstacle standing between you and better outcomes is not your circumstances, your education, or even your raw intelligence. It is the invisible mental software running inside your head that you never consciously installed and cannot easily detect. Let me take you through the most powerful ideas in this book, because understanding them can genuinely transform how you approach every important decision in your life. The book opens with a story that perfectly illustrates the problem. A woman sits in her doctor's office. She is intelligent, well-educated, successful by every external measure. The doctor delivers news about a test result that requires a decision. Two options, each with different risks. Both supported by data, both carrying uncertainty. She freezes, not because she lacks information. The doctor provides plenty, not because she lacks intelligence. She has solved complex problems throughout her career. She freezes because in that moment, when the stakes actually matter, her brain abandons her. She goes home and researches obsessively, but only reads articles confirming what she already wants to believe. She asks friends for advice but dismisses anyone who disagrees with her initial reaction. She delays the decision for weeks while the window for optimal action slowly closes. When she finally decides, she chooses based on which option feels less frightening in that moment, not which option actually serves her best interests. 6 months later, dealing with consequences she could have avoided, she asks herself the question that haunts her: why did I not think more clearly when it actually mattered? Here's what makes this story disturbing. She is not unusual. She is typical. This is how most people make most important decisions. Not through strategic analysis. Through emotional reaction disguised as reasoning. Through mental shortcuts that feel like thinking but are not. Through patterns that evolved for a world that no longer exists. And the cruelest part is that people never know this is happening. They believe they are being rational. They feel certain they considered all the angles. The cognitive machinery that distorts their thinking also hides the distortion from their awareness. So what separates people who consistently make better decisions from everyone else? The book identifies 4 foundational capabilities that strategic thinkers develop. Miss any one of them, and your analysis will have critical blind spots. The first capability is systems thinking. When most people look at a problem, they see an isolated event. A symptom, something to fix directly. Strategic thinkers see a web of interconnections. They understand that everything connects to everything else. That surface problems are usually symptoms of underlying structures. That you cannot change one part of a system without triggering effects throughout the rest. Consider a team that keeps missing deadlines. Surface-level thinking blames the team members. Maybe they need more motivation. Maybe someone should be fired. Maybe they need stricter management. Systems thinking asks completely different questions. What incentives are shaping their behavior? What resource constraints affect their capacity? What information do they have access to or lack? What feedback loops are reinforcing the pattern? What would actually have to change for the outcome to be different? The surface approach treats symptoms and watches them return. The systems approach identifies leverage points where real, lasting change becomes possible. The second capability is temporal thinking. Most people are trapped in the present moment. They optimize for immediate results. They react to whatever is directly in front of them. They make decisions based on how things feel right now. Strategic thinkers hold multiple time horizons in their minds simultaneously. They ask a sequence of questions. What happens next? Then what happens after that? Then what happens after that? They trace consequences forward through time. They recognize that today's decisions create tomorrow's constraints and opportunities. A choice might look excellent today but terrible in 3 years. A sacrifice might hurt now but compound into massive advantage over a decade. You cannot see these patterns if you are locked in the present. This temporal extension is what separates genuine investment from speculation. Strategy from mere tactics. Building something lasting from chasing whatever seems attractive right now. The third capability is probabilistic thinking. Most people think in certainties. Will this work? Yes or no. Is this true? Yes or no. Should I do this? Yes or no. Strategic thinkers think in probabilities and ranges. They ask different questions. What is the probability this works? What is the range of possible outcomes? What is the expected value when I consider both upside and downside scenarios? This shift is profound. It means you stop demanding certainty before acting, because certainty rarely exists. It means you prepare for multiple scenarios rather than betting everything on one prediction. It means you can make good decisions even when you do not know exactly what will happen, because you have accounted for the uncertainty. The fourth capability is leverage thinking. Most people believe that more effort produces proportionally more results. Work twice as hard, get twice as much. Strategic thinkers know this is false. Some actions produce 10 times the results of other actions requiring the same effort. Some decisions unlock cascading benefits. Some positions multiply your impact while others dissipate it. Leverage thinking is the constant search for these high-impact points. Where can small inputs create disproportionate outputs? What activities generate compound returns? What positions multiply effectiveness? This explains why some people accomplish vastly more than others without appearing to work harder. They are not working harder. They are working at higher leverage points. Now, these four capabilities rest on something even more fundamental. Metacognition, the ability to observe your own thinking as it happens. Most people are completely unaware of how they think. Thoughts arise. They believe them. They act on them. They never question the process that generated those thoughts in the first place. Strategic thinkers develop an internal observer, a part of themselves that watches their own thinking and catches it when it goes wrong. This observer notices when you are pattern matching to situations that do not actually match the current one. It catches emotional reactions masquerading as rational analysis. It recognizes when you are taking shortcuts that serve comfort rather than truth. Without this metacognitive capability, you cannot apply the four pillars consistently. Your autopilot keeps taking over. Your biases keep distorting your judgment. You keep making the same mistakes while believing you have learned from them. This brings us to what the book calls the invisible hijacker inside your head. Your brain is fundamentally, structurally lazy. That is not an insult. That is biology. Your brain weighs about 2% of your body mass but consumes roughly 20% of your total energy. In the environment where humans evolved, calories were scarce and survival was uncertain. A brain that burned energy unnecessarily was a brain attached to a body that might starve. So evolution created a brain that automates everything it possibly can. It built mental shortcuts that let you navigate most of life without burning precious cognitive fuel. When you drive a familiar route, you do not consciously think about every turn. When you have a conversation, you do not deliberately choose each word. Your brain handles all of this on autopilot, freeing your conscious mind for other things. This is genuinely brilliant engineering. It is why you can function at all. But here is where it becomes a trap. Your brain cannot tell the difference between situations that deserve autopilot and situations that demand deliberate analysis. It will apply the same energy-saving shortcuts to choosing what to eat for breakfast and to deciding whether to marry someone. It will use the same pattern matching that helps you recognize faces to make snap judgments about people you have never met. It will treat a complex business decision the same way it treats tying your shoes. And you will not notice. You will not feel yourself taking shortcuts. You will feel like you are thinking carefully when you are actually just running on autopilot. The book identifies 3 primary ways that autopilot sabotages clear thinking. The first is pattern matching without context. Your brain is constantly scanning for similarities between what you are experiencing now and what you have experienced before. When it finds a match, it applies whatever worked in the past. This works beautifully when patterns actually match. It fails catastrophically when they do not. A manager who built a successful team at one company applies the exact same approach at a new organization. Same management style, same expectations, same methods. It does not work at all. The new organization has completely different dynamics, culture, and incentive structures. The surface similarities masked fundamental differences requiring completely different approaches. The brain said, "Management situation, I know how to manage." It never asked, "Is this management situation actually the same as the previous one?" The second saboteur is emotional hijacking. When you perceive a threat, your nervous system launches a cascade of chemical changes. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. Adrenaline spikes. Blood flow shifts away from your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for strategic thinking and complex analysis, and redirects to your limbic system, the ancient structures responsible for survival reactions. In this state, you literally cannot think strategically. The hardware required for strategic thinking is offline. And this is precisely when many of the most important decisions get made. Under pressure, under deadline, under emotional stress, you make your worst decisions exactly when you think the stakes demand your best thinking. The third saboteur is cognitive conservatism. Your brain treats the familiar as safe and the unfamiliar as dangerous. This made sense when the familiar meant the proven path to water and the unfamiliar meant possibly walking into predator territory. It makes much less sense now. This is why people stay in jobs they hate for years. Why they maintain relationships that make them miserable. Why they keep using strategies that stopped working long ago. The familiar is not actually safer. It just feels safer. And that feeling keeps millions of people trapped in situations they have long since outgrown. So what do we do about all this? The book argues that you cannot remove autopilot. It is too fundamental to how your brain works. But you can build a manual override system that recognizes when autopilot has taken over and intervenes to restore deliberate thinking. The first component is trigger recognition. Learn to notice the moments when autopilot is most likely running the show. You feel certain about something but have not actually analyzed it. You are experiencing strong emotions, especially fear, anger, or urgency. You notice you are applying a familiar solution without asking whether the situation actually matches. You feel reluctance to consider alternatives. When you notice any of these triggers, that is your cue to pause and ask whether you are actually thinking or whether autopilot is thinking for you. The second component is specific debiasing techniques. The outside view asks you to step back and consider what typically happens in situations like yours, rather than focusing on all the unique details of your specific case. The premortem asks you to assume your plan has already failed spectacularly and then work backward to identify what caused the failure. This surfaces obstacles that forward planning misses. The opposite test requires you to spend 60 seconds genuinely arguing the opposing position to whatever conclusion you have reached. Not as a game, but as a real attempt to understand why a reasonable person might disagree. The third component is emotional regulation. The most powerful technique is reframing, consciously changing how you interpret a situation. A threat becomes a challenge. A setback becomes feedback. Criticism becomes information. This is not positive thinking or denial. It is strategic interpretation. The situation stays the same, but how you frame it determines which brain systems get activated. Another technique is temporal distancing. When emotions run high, ask yourself how you will see this situation in 10 years. How would someone from a completely different background interpret what is happening? These questions create psychological distance that restores access to analytical thinking. Now let us talk about the specific cognitive biases that corrupt your judgment. Confirmation bias is perhaps the most dangerous. Once you form an initial opinion about something, your brain automatically filters all subsequent information to support that opinion. Information that confirms your belief gets noticed, remembered, and weighted heavily. Information that contradicts gets ignored, forgotten, or explained away. This filtering happens before conscious thought. The information is already distorted by the time you become aware of it. Imagine you believe a colleague is incompetent. When they make a mistake, your brain files it as evidence confirming incompetence. When they do something well, your brain explains it away as luck or help from others. After a year, you are completely convinced your initial impression was correct because you have collected so much supporting evidence. Except you have not. You have been running a rigged trial from the start. The evidence that would have changed your mind was filtered out before you ever saw it. The availability heuristic distorts how you assess risk. Your brain judges the probability of events based on how easily you can remember examples. If you can quickly recall instances of something happening, your brain assumes it happens frequently. This means your risk assessment is determined by your memory, not by actual statistics. And your memory is shaped by what is vivid, recent, emotional, and frequently repeated, none of which has any necessary connection to what is actually common. This is why people fear plane crashes after seeing them in the news, even though driving to avoid flying dramatically increases their actual risk of dying. Plane crashes are vivid and memorable. Car accidents are common and forgettable. Anchoring distorts almost every numerical judgment you make. The first piece of information you encounter about any topic becomes a reference point that influences all subsequent judgments, even when the anchor is obviously irrelevant, even when you consciously know it should not affect you. Researchers demonstrated this by having people watch a roulette wheel land on either 10 or 65. then asking them an unrelated question about what percentage of African countries are in the United Nations. The people who saw 65 gave higher estimates. A completely meaningless number had distorted their judgment. The planning fallacy causes systematic overconfidence about timelines and outcomes. When you plan, you focus on the specific plan you have developed. You imagine the steps. You picture things going more or less according to plan. You are thinking inside the scenario you have created. What you are not doing is consulting base rates, the statistical reality of how projects like yours typically unfold. You are not asking how long similar projects usually take. You are asking how long your specific plan takes if it works. Those two questions have very different answers. This is why virtually every major project goes over budget and over time. Self-serving bias protects your ego at the expense of accurate self-assessment. When something goes well, your brain attributes it to your skill and effort. When something goes badly, your brain blames external factors. This pattern is universal and largely unconscious. And then there is the bias blind spot, which might be the most dangerous of all. This is your tendency to recognize cognitive biases in other people while remaining blind to those exact same biases in yourself. The more you learn about biases, the worse this can get. You become increasingly confident that you can avoid them. You see others falling for confirmation bias and think you would never make that mistake. Studies show that even psychologists who study biases professionally continue to fall for them in their own decision-making. Knowledge is not enough. The biases are built into the hardware. So the solution is not to become bias-free. That is impossible. The solution is to build external systems and processes that catch biases, since you cannot reliably catch them internally. For confirmation bias, do not trust yourself to seek contradictory evidence. Build it into your process. Before any important decision, require yourself to find 3 compelling arguments against your preferred position. For availability bias, do not trust your intuitive sense of risk. Look up actual statistics. Base rates exist for almost everything. For anchoring, be careful about the first numbers you encounter. When possible, do your own analysis before seeing anyone else's figures. For planning fallacy, stop asking how long this will take. Start asking how long projects like this typically take. For self-serving bias, create mechanisms to collect honest feedback from people with no incentive to flatter you. For the bias blind spot, assume you are affected by every bias you know about, especially when you feel confident you are not. Now let us turn to mental models, which are among the most powerful thinking tools that exist. A mental model is a simplified representation of how something works. It is a framework that helps you understand, predict, and navigate complex situations. What makes mental models extraordinarily valuable is that they transfer across domains. A concept from biology can illuminate a business problem. An insight from physics can transform how you think about relationships. The most effective thinkers collect mental models from everywhere and apply them creatively to whatever situation they face. The compounding model reveals that growth in many domains is not linear but exponential. Knowledge compounds. Each new piece connects to existing knowledge and makes future learning easier. Someone with 10 years in a field does not just know 10 times more than someone with 1 year. They might know 100 times more because each year built on all the previous years. Relationships compound. Positive interactions build trust. Trust enables better interactions. Long-term relationships become more valuable over time because of accumulated trust. Skills compound. Learning one skill often makes related skills easier to acquire. Once you see compounding as a pattern, you start making different decisions. Instead of asking about immediate payoff, you ask about compounding potential. An action with modest immediate results but high compounding potential might be far more valuable than an action with high immediate results but no compounding effect. The feedback loop model explains how systems maintain themselves or change. Reinforcing loops amplify change. A startup creates a great product. Happy customers tell others. More customers attract more resources. More resources enable a better product. Each success creates conditions for more success. But reinforcing loops work in both directions. A company losing customers has less money for development. Worse products drive away more customers. The same pattern drives decline. Balancing loops create stability. They counteract changes and keep systems in equilibrium. When you get too hot, you sweat to cool down. When a price rises too high, demand drops and brings it back down. Understanding these loops transforms how you analyze problems. When you see something spiraling, you ask what reinforcing loops are driving it and where you could intervene to break the cycle. The incentives model cuts through confusion about human behavior. If you want to understand why people do what they do, look at what behaviors are actually rewarded and punished, not at what people say they value. A company says it values innovation, but promotes people who avoid risks. Employees learn to avoid risks regardless of the stated values. A person says they want honest feedback, but becomes defensive when criticized. People learn that honest feedback is actually unwelcome. For predicting behavior, analyze incentive structures rather than stated intentions. For changing behavior, change incentives rather than just asking for different behavior. The second-order effects model extends your analysis through time. First-order thinking asks what happens if you take an action. Second-order thinking asks what happens after that, and after that, and after that. A city with traffic congestion builds more roads. First-order thinking says more roads mean more capacity and less congestion. But more roads make driving easier, so more people drive, and development spreads along the new routes. Within years, the new roads are just as congested as the old ones. Before any important decision, trace at least 2 or 3 levels of consequences. The opportunity cost model reframes every choice as a trade-off. Every choice is actually 2 choices, what you do and what you give up by doing it. The value of what you give up is your opportunity cost. A good opportunity might be a terrible choice if it prevents a better opportunity. A reasonable use of time might be wasteful if alternatives would have been more valuable. Strategic thinkers compare options to the best available alternative, not to zero. The margin of safety model argues for building buffers rather than optimizing to the edge. Engineers who build bridges design them to hold many times the expected load. The excess capacity handles unexpected stress. Financial margin of safety means reserves beyond expected needs. Time margin of safety means slack in schedules. Health margin of safety means fitness beyond daily requirements. Unexpected things always happen. The question is whether you have built enough buffer to absorb them. People operating at the edge of capacity are perpetually vulnerable. One surprise creates crisis. People with healthy margins can absorb shocks, capitalize on opportunities, and recover from mistakes. Now let us discuss first principles thinking, which might be the most powerful approach of all. Most thinking is analogical. You encounter a new situation and ask what similar situations you have seen before, then apply whatever worked previously. This is efficient but limiting. It keeps you trapped within the boundaries of existing solutions. You inherit all the assumptions embedded in previous approaches without recognizing them as assumptions. First principles thinking works differently. Instead of asking what has worked before, you ask what is actually true. What are the fundamental facts, laws, and constraints? What solutions can be built from those foundations? This approach is slower and harder, but it reveals possibilities that analogical thinking can never see. The process has 3 steps. First, surface your assumptions. Most problems come loaded with assumptions about what is possible, required, and appropriate. These assumptions feel like facts. Your job is to make them visible and question each one. Is this constraint a law of nature or a human convention? Is this limitation permanent or just how things have been done? Second, break the problem down to fundamental components. Strip away the assumptions and identify what you are actually trying to achieve. What are the real constraints that cannot be violated? Third, rebuild from the foundations. Construct solutions using only the fundamental elements. The solutions might look nothing like existing approaches because they are not copying existing approaches. Consider someone unhappy in their career. The conventional approach involves browsing job listings, updating resumes, networking in the same industry, hoping someone will hire them. All of this assumes a fundamental model. You are a job seeker competing for predefined positions. First principles asks different questions. What do you actually want from work? Income, meaning, learning, autonomy, contribution. What do employers actually want? Value creation, problems solved, results achieved. Now you can see differently. You could create your own position by identifying problems a company faces and proposing to solve them. You could build skills that let you create value independently. You could develop multiple income sources. You could redefine what career success means. None of these solutions come from browsing job listings. They come from questioning assumptions and rebuilding from fundamentals. Let us talk about thinking under pressure, because this is where most strategic thinking fails. The moments when you most need clear thinking are precisely the moments when your brain becomes least capable of it. When stress rises, blood flow shifts away from your analytical centers. Your thinking narrows. Your creativity vanishes. Your ability to consider multiple perspectives collapses. You become reactive, impulsive, short-sighted. The book suggests stress inoculation as a training approach. Expose yourself to progressively increasing pressure in controlled environments so your brain learns that pressure does not require cognitive shutdown. You can also develop decision protocols, predetermined frameworks that do some of the thinking when your thinking is compromised. The OUTTHINK loop is one such protocol. Observe what is actually happening. Orient by considering context and objectives. Decide on the best action. Act, then cycle back to observe results. A rapid prioritization matrix is another tool. List options, identify your 3 most important criteria, score each option quickly, choose the highest scoring option and move forward. These are not perfect analysis. They are good enough analysis you can actually execute when perfect analysis is impossible. Under pressure, your time horizon also collapses. You start optimizing for the next 10 seconds while ignoring the next 10 years. Counter this by forcing yourself to consider 3 time horizons before any significant decision. How will this look in 10 minutes? 10 months? 10 years? If the answers conflict, you have found where the real decision lies. Also recognize that most urgency is artificial. Some deadlines are real, but a shocking amount of pressure is either created to manipulate you or self-imposed through your own assumptions. Before accepting time pressure as real, ask what actually happens if you take more time. Pattern recognition is another crucial strategic skill. The ability to see what is coming before it becomes obvious is not prediction or magic. It is recognizing how current conditions resemble past conditions and anticipating how similar patterns typically resolve. This skill develops through deliberate cultivation. Study history because most current situations have played out before in different forms. Track key variables over time. Test your pattern hypotheses against what actually happens. Look for leading indicators, early signals that larger patterns are beginning. Shifts in customer sentiment before sales numbers change. Changes in communication patterns before relationship conflicts surface. Subtle energy changes before illness manifests. Develop scenario planning capabilities. Instead of planning for one expected future, imagine multiple possible futures based on different resolutions of key uncertainties. For each scenario, ask what strategies would work best and what signals would suggest that scenario is becoming more likely. Watch for those signals and adjust as the actual future reveals itself. Also watch for signs that established patterns are breaking down. When predictions start failing more often and unexpected outliers multiply, underlying conditions have probably changed in ways that break the old patterns. Emotional intelligence deserves serious attention in strategic thinking. There is a damaging myth that good thinking is purely rational and emotions are the enemy of clear analysis. The truth is that emotions are data. They are sophisticated information processing systems refined over millions of years. They detect patterns your conscious mind cannot see. They evaluate situations against your values faster than any logical analysis. When you feel fear about a decision, that fear might be detecting a genuine risk your analysis missed. It might be pattern matching to relevant past experiences. It might be signaling that the decision violates your values in ways you have not consciously recognized. The fear might also be irrational, but you cannot know until you examine it. Strategic emotional intelligence involves 4 dimensions. Emotional awareness is recognizing your own states and understanding what triggers them. This creates space between stimulus and response. Emotional regulation is managing your states so it supports clear thinking. Controlled breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Cognitive reframing changes your interpretation of situations. Social awareness is reading the emotional states of others involved in your situation. Watch for incongruence between what people say and what their expressions reveal. Relationship management is using emotional intelligence to build trust and influence outcomes. Intuition deserves respect rather than dismissal. It is not magic. It is rapid pattern processing by unconscious systems. In domains where you have extensive experience, intuitive insights often arrive faster than conscious analysis could. The key is distinguishing reliable intuition from emotional bias. Reliable intuition tends to feel calm and clear, arriving suddenly after unconscious processing. Emotional bias tends to feel urgent and attached to specific outcomes. Treat intuitive insights as hypotheses worth testing rather than either following them blindly or dismissing them automatically. Adaptive intelligence is essential because the world keeps changing. The smarter you become, the the better you get at defending your existing beliefs. This is exactly when you become most vulnerable. What worked brilliantly in one environment can fail catastrophically when conditions shift. Rigid intelligence becomes a liability in a changing world. Adaptive intelligence, the ability to update thinking and develop new capabilities as circumstances require, is what creates sustained advantage. Your brain actively resists updating beliefs. Confirmation bias filters contradictory evidence. Sunk cost fallacy pushes you to persist with failing approaches. Identity attachment makes changing your mind feel like attacking yourself. Counter this with regular belief audits. For your most important beliefs, periodically ask what evidence originally convinced you, what evidence would convince you that you were wrong, and whether you have actively looked for such evidence. Deliberately seek out intelligent people who disagree with you. Seriously consider contradictory information rather than immediately explaining it away. Build cognitive diversity by developing multiple frameworks for understanding the same phenomena. Study how different disciplines approach similar problems. When your primary model fails, alternative models can provide insight. Develop scenario-based adaptability. Planning for multiple possible futures reveals hidden assumptions and reduces surprise when changes occur. Build capabilities that remain valuable regardless of which future unfolds. Meta skills like learning how to learn, thinking clearly under uncertainty, and building trust transfer across domains and do not become obsolete. Strategic communication and influence are force multipliers for your thinking. Being right is not enough. Ideas do not win on merit alone. They win when they travel from your mind into other minds and create change there. The first principle of strategic communication is that it is not about you. What matters is what happens in the mind of the person receiving your message. Instead of asking what you want to say, ask what this person needs to hear in order to understand what you need them to understand. Structure creates understanding. The human brain has limited working memory. Overwhelm this capacity and comprehension collapses. Lead with your conclusion, then provide supporting arguments, then offer evidence. Concrete details stick while abstract concepts slide off. The specific example, the vivid case, does more persuasive work than an hour of generalities. In negotiation, focus on interests rather than positions. Positions are what people say they want. Interests are the underlying needs driving those positions. Different positions can often serve the same interests. When you understand interests, you can find solutions that satisfy everyone. Before important negotiations, clarify your own interests, anticipate the other party's likely interests, identify your best alternative if negotiation fails, generate options that might satisfy both parties, and identify objective criteria for evaluating options. Talk less and listen more. Every word the other person says contains information about their priorities, constraints, and flexibility. Extract this information through active listening. For difficult conversations, establish shared purpose first. Separate observations from interpretations. Own your perspective rather than making accusations. Focus on specific behaviors rather than character. Make requests rather than demands. Systems thinking and leverage points reveal where to focus your energy. Working harder rarely solves problems because you are pushing against a system that does not care about your effort. Structure always wins. A hospital wants to reduce infections. They train staff better, send reminders, hold meetings. Infections stay the same, because the structure has not changed. Staffing ratios, floor layouts, equipment placement, and reporting systems are generating the behavior. Until structure changes, you are yelling at symptoms. Not all interventions are equal. There is a hierarchy of leverage points. At the lowest level are numbers. Budgets, targets, quantities. Most people spend their energy here. The system absorbs these adjustments. Higher leverage comes from changing the connections. Who reports to whom? What information flows where? Small changes here can transform entire organizations. Higher still is changing the rules. Policies, incentives, what gets rewarded and punished. Above that is the power to make rules. But the highest leverage point is changing the paradigm, the deep assumptions from which systems arise. When paradigms shift, entire systems restructure around new organizing principles. Complex systems also fight back. They respond to interventions in ways that neutralize your efforts or create new problems. The solution is not to push harder but to work with system dynamics, finding where the system wants to change and removing the balancing loops blocking progress. Be aware of delays between action and consequence. Results often take months or years to appear. Many solutions get abandoned before they have time to work because people cannot distinguish between strategies that are not working and strategies that have not had time to work yet. Long-term vision and planning create the foundation for everything else. Most people live inside a window of about 72 hours, thinking about yesterday, reacting to today, vaguely worrying about tomorrow. Beyond that is fog. Strategic thinkers hold multiple time horizons simultaneously, making decisions today that serve objectives years away. Vision is not fantasy. Fantasy imagines outcomes without connecting them to reality. Vision sees a future state clearly enough that it creates gravitational pull on present decisions. Vision rooted in values lasts. When vision aligns with what you genuinely care about, you access motivation that does not deplete. Scenario planning prepares you for multiple futures rather than betting on one prediction. Identify key uncertainties, develop distinct scenarios, determine what strategies work best in each, and watch for signals suggesting which scenarios are becoming more likely. Resource allocation is strategy. You do not have unlimited time, energy, or attention. A small fraction of activities creates most of your results. Strategic allocation means identifying those high-impact activities and protecting them ruthlessly, which requires saying no constantly. Build strategic capabilities that remain valuable across scenarios. Meta skills, relationships, reputation, financial reserves, and health are assets that compound and transfer. Risk management means taking intelligent risks while avoiding catastrophic ones. Catastrophic risks knock you out of the game entirely. Everything else is manageable. Maintain reserves, develop contingency plans for serious threats, then move forward with appropriate boldness. Implementation is where strategy lives or dies. Vision without execution is hallucination. Break long-term objectives into milestones. Build review rhythms. Create accountability systems. Your strategy is what you actually do, not what you say you will do. Finally, converting understanding into capability requires closing the gap between knowing and doing. Your brain resists change. Existing patterns feel natural and efficient. Replacing them requires conscious effort that depletes energy. The goal is not to fight your brain constantly. That is exhausting. The goal is to practice new patterns until they become the new defaults, until strategic thinking feels as natural as the reactive thinking it replaces. This takes time, repetition, and deliberate effort over months and years. Do not try to change everything at once. Choose one principle most relevant to your current challenges. Focus on it for weeks until it becomes habitual. Then add another. Start a decision journal. Before significant decisions, write down what you are deciding, your options, your reasoning, your predictions, and what would change your mind. Then revisit later and compare predictions to results. This creates tight feedback loops that dramatically accelerate learning. Design your environment to support strategic thinking. Surround yourself with people who think strategically. Create spaces for deep thought. Build systems that prompt strategic behavior. Teach these concepts to others. Explaining forces you to clarify your own understanding. Judge your thinking by process quality, not just outcomes. Good thinking does not guarantee good outcomes because the world is uncertain. But good process, consistently applied, produces better outcomes over time. The transformation is real. It happens to people who do the work. Strategic thinking becomes not something you occasionally do but something you are. The ultimate recognition is this. Your mind is not neutral territory showing you reality clearly. It is a filter, a constructor, sometimes a saboteur. The people who thrive are not those with the highest intelligence but those who have learned to work with their cognitive machinery instead of being controlled by it. The gap between where you are and where you could be is not talent, not luck, not circumstance. It is thinking. Fix the thinking and everything else follows.